Hello and welcome wherever you're listening us from. My name is Timur Umarov. I'm a fellow at Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. And you're listening and watching Carnegie China's Global Dialogue series. This is an annual series that brings together experts from Carnegie's 5 centers around the world to discuss issues related to China's evolving international role. Our first Carnegie Global Dialogue was devoted to China's role in the Pacific Islands. This is the second episode, and here we will be talking about China's presence, influence, and ambitions in Central Asia. And I cannot imagine a better panel to do it as we have here. Let me introduce our speakers today. Dr. Nargis Kasanova is a senior fellow and director of the program on Central Asia at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. Welcome. And Dr. Zhou Jiayi, she's a researcher in the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute Conflict, Peace and Security Program. Thank you very much for making the time and joining us. And today we are going to talk about Central Asia. I encourage you not to limit ourselves only on the 5 countries of which is traditionally being perceived as Central Asia, but also go a little bit beyond that to look at the region from the perspective as some of my colleagues put it, Central Eurasia or Continental Asia. And in the last couple of years, we've seen so many different changes happening in the region. I should say that maybe the most consequential event was happening not at the borders of Central Asia, but a bit far beyond, with the Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And there are many opinions about the effect of the war in Ukraine on Central Asia. I would say many believe that it structurally changed Central Asia. It structurally changed the region's relations with Russia, with China, with other parts of the world. And let me start by the first question to Nargis, if I may. Do you agree that the war in Ukraine has fundamentally changed Central Asia and including its relationship with China? Or would you say that the changes are not fundamental, but, less so?
Well, thank you very much, Timur. It's a great pleasure to be with you here and do this panel. The war in Ukraine, definitely there is a sense of before and after February 2022. But earlier there was also a sense of before and after when Russia annexed Crimea and started a war in eastern Ukraine. And before that, there was before and after Russia-Georgia war in 2008. So I would say the fundamental shift that we see now, this fundamental change, started back then around 2007, 2008 with Putin giving that wonderful speech in Munich in 2007. And that's when Russia started kind of changing the rules of the game in the post-Soviet space. And that's when Russia started drifting away from the West and leaning more onto China. And Central Asian states, in the meantime, started sort of, being more afraid of Russia, and as a result, also leaning more onto China. And of course, it helped that at the time, China started giving big loans to Central Asian states. So we had these shocks, right? But of course, in terms of magnitude, if we compare it to an earthquake, the magnitude varied. Yeah. So of course, Russia-Georgia war, a shock to the system, annexation of Crimea, a higher magnitude because Russia did a direct land grab and kind of violated territorial integrity, but and also kind of putting down the sovereignty of post-Soviet states, or something very scary for other post-Soviet states. And now this full-scale invasion, as you said in your introduction, and as a result of that, of course, Russia now is much more, in the corner with China, and we are also kind of leaning much more onto China. And now it's kind of China is seen as this reliable, predictable regional power for Central Asian states. So I would say it is quite fundamental, but it didn't happen sort of overnight. It happened with the help of this series of shocks.
Talking about series of shocks, I remember back in August 2021, the international attention was all on Afghanistan when the Taliban came to power, and there was also a lot of opinions about what's going to be the biggest consequence for Central Asia. How's China going to react on that? And speaking from 2024, and I will ask Jiayi, if I may, would you say that China is still looking at Afghanistan as a priority direction of its foreign policy? Do you think that China connects Afghanistan with its Central Asia policy, and how the perception of Afghanistan changed in this 3 years already?
Thanks for the question, Timur, and for also inviting me to this great event. You mentioned whether or not Afghanistan is still a priority for China. I would question whether at any point it was the number one priority. I think certainly in the immediate aftermath of the Taliban takeover in Kabul, that was certainly a concern for everybody. And there are certainly many dimensions in which China is still pouring significant diplomatic resources and attention to Afghanistan and its region. The density of interactions, the diplomatic sort of semi-recognition of the Taliban means that it's certainly something that China thinks about. But I would question, to what extent it's a truly significant focus of China's foreign policy, given all of its other priorities around the world, particularly in relation to great power competition. I think there was a moment in the immediate aftermath where China had hoped that Afghanistan and the possible instability that it might pose could be an area of cooperation between China and the US. I think its hopes in this direction were quickly dashed by the just fundamental lack of prioritization of Afghanistan by the Biden administration. So that fell dead in the water. And there's been a lot of, hullabaloo about, recently China's diplomatic recognition of the Taliban ambassador. But I think when you look at full scale, what China has been pouring in terms of economic resources into Afghanistan, humanitarian or development resources, it's quite meager. I think the overall focus, continues to be other domains. As for sort of how it connects to Central Asia, I would say it's certainly always been in the background of its cooperation with Central Asia, to the extent that there is a security dimension to that, and security cooperation, which has often and almost exclusively focused on, sort of the possibility of terrorism and instability, or the three evils, of which Afghan spillover is one dimension. But there, I wouldn't overstress the broad scale Central Asia strategy dimension of that. I think it's much more being implemented through bilateral and minilateral measures, and certainly where the immediate threat is along the border that Tajikistan shares with Afghanistan, which is where China has poured the most significant security resources to address the problem. And I think the fact that, in my view, it's still kind of a low buzzing priority for the Chinese government. But the low level is also to say that the situation in terms of the security threat, I don't think the perception is extremely high. The border that Afghanistan shares with China is extremely small. It's managed well through also other means, fortification within China, but also, as I mentioned, security cooperation with Tajikistan. And I think China's diplomatic recognition of the Taliban, at least semi-recognition, I think goes to say that China has at least some confidence that Taliban are taking their concerns into account and have been more or less somewhat effective in addressing them.
We will be back to Afghanistan in a moment. Before we do that, I encourage our listeners and those who watch us, if you have any questions for our experts, please write them in the comment section on YouTube Live. Going back a little bit to the priorities of China, it's clear and has become even more clear in the last, I would say, 2 years that Russia is a priority for China. Of course, the US is number one priority, but Russia still is, I would say, in the top 3 dimensions of Chinese foreign policy. And many experts has been saying that Central Asia is this weak point in this partnership between Beijing and Moscow, that one day we will see some kind of a conflict because both Russia and China have this overlapping interest, and it will create a tension between those two countries. Nargis, do you agree with this perception about China and Russia in Central Asia, or do you think that the level of cooperation between those countries is underestimated?
I think it's more subtle and murky than that, than either competition, rivalry, or cooperation. I think it's a mix of the two. They cooperate where their interests overlap or partially overlap, and they compete, where these interests don't overlap. And in terms of the kind of overlapping interests, at least until now, both were interested in stability in the region. Both were interested in the development of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as this kind of international multilateral organization that is kind of an alternative to the Western-led, US-led order. And the interest didn't quite overlap in the area of economic development and trade. Well, both had their own economic cooperation integration projects. So Russia has its Eurasian economic integration project, and China has Belt and Road Initiative. And for both projects, Central Asia is quite important. So there, in the aftermath of 2014 annexation and all that, and sanctions imposed by the West, Russia had to kind of, at least rhetorically, kind of say, okay, yeah, let's link our two projects. But we saw that on the ground not much happened. So now I think it kind of, with this change in the balance of power, with China becoming kind of stronger and gaining in gravitas while Russia is losing, right? Losing in this gravitas and losing this position. We'll see how that will play out, and whether kind of China can become more assertive in the region. And definitely there are grounds for that. But I think Chinese policymakers, they're quite kind of patient. They know that the time is on their side, and the region itself is gravitating more and more toward China. Yeah. For various reasons. Of course, China is, kind of a very attractive partner. Yes, it's a dynamic economy. Yes, now there are difficulties, but still, for Central Asian economies, Chinese economy is incredibly important, and and it's a source of major opportunities. And politically also, the more we're afraid of Russia, the more kind of we would cling to China, because China is kind of, we feel that for China, Central Asia is important. Maybe not priority number one, but it's an important neighborhood. And China is interested in the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Central Asian states, and we see it in kind of last year. If we compare the two joint statements, if we compare the joint statement made by Putin and Xi, I think it was in March last year, and if we compare the declaration made by President Xi and Central Asian presidents in Xi'an in May, kind of after at the end of the Xi'an summit, we see how different these documents are. And the China-Russia document is very short, and if you look at it, these are primarily Beijing's points. It's what Beijing wants. Very few, kind of a couple of paragraphs that are kind of, okay, yeah, these are Russia's interests, and we go along with the Russian interest. If you look at the Xi'an declaration, it's a very comprehensive document. Both are like comprehensive partnership, whatever, right? But much more comprehensive in case of China Central Asia statement, kind of deeper cooperation, and China is giving a lot of things to Central Asian neighbors. If we compare it to the offerings to Russia, offerings to Russia are meager in comparison, I would say, to what China is offering to its Central Asian neighbors. And I think it has something to do with the hierarchies, like, for China, Central Asian states are these kind of small states in the, on the periphery of China, and China positions itself as this kind of big benevolent power vis-a-vis Central Asians. And Russia is on par, right? And you don't need to be benevolent to somebody in your, kind of in your league, in your weight category. So it's I think it's a tougher relationship in a way, but yeah.
Thank you. But I have a follow-up. Do you think that, on the security level, the cooperation between China and Central Asian countries is changing, considering that Central Asian countries need more security right now, with the invasion of Ukraine, and especially when we speak about Kazakhstan? Do you see any attempts from Central Asia to try to diversify their ties and include China in this diversification?
I think there is growing security cooperation between Central Asian states and China, but you said it, it's diversification. So we have intensification of security partnerships with other actors. Turkey is important in this regard. More is procured from Western countries. So so I think it's more political support that the Central Asian states are seeking from China, rather than kind of becoming a client state in the security area. And I don't think that China is ready to offer it as well. Yes, there are these outposts on the Tajik-Afghan border, but I think that's sort of I would say that's maximum, but I don't know what Jai thinks. Maybe she has a different take on it.
Yes, Jai, please join. Do you see any cooperation between Central Asian countries and China, growing since 2021 and the domestic changes in Afghanistan, or would you say that it's a kind of a plateau that we're observing for the last decade?
I do think there's certainly some beefed up interactions. I would say a lot of that is still bilateral, as mentioned with Tajikistan, sort of recent announcements of them deepening cooperation and sort of agreements on joint exercises to be held more regularly. I would say, I mean, there's been discussions of different formats in which they can sort of cooperate a bit deeper on possibly the spillovers in Afghanistan. But for a long time, at least at kind of the regional level and platforms like SEO, a lot of that is you know, it's very hard to deepen the level of cooperation that actually takes place. But I would certainly think, you know, once you start to count up the numbers, the trainings, you know, sort of the smaller scale kind of levels of security cooperation, I'm sure that is deepening as in all areas. I think China is providing and trying to provide more. So I wouldn't say it's in a significant enough for us to say there's a major shift in policy, but I would say certainly when you look at the ground, probably the density is a bit higher in terms of those kinds of interactions.
Yeah, but going a little bit further, just like let's expand the map. We've seen that in the last 2 years, Central Asian countries are trying their best to stay very balanced when it comes to their relationship with Russia specifically. And as a part of that diversification, we see that the relationship with the European Union is on the rise. And European Union is also very much interested in Central Asia. I would say that even more than ever before, we've seen a lot of high-level visits to Central Asia. There are a lot of talks about global gateway, and recently, European Union promised 10 billion investment into the connectivity and resilience of Central Asia. Do you see any potential cooperation between European Union and China, considering that European Union wants to become influential in infrastructure, and China is already number one investor in this dimension? Or do you see that European Union portrays itself as a kind of competitor to China's Belt and Road in Central Asia? Jai.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's quite interesting to sometimes come back to an issue that you haven't worked on for a bit, because the last time I was looking at these connectivity issues, it was pre-pandemic, where connectivity was really the buzzword. And then many years since, you know, the lifetime of COVID and et cetera, really that word seemed to have completely dropped off the policy map. Instead, you know, you had a strong emphasis on resilience, economic security, shortening supply chains, everything that's basically opposite of connectivity. But when you return to this again, you see in the past year, let's say, connectivity is coming back with a vengeance, and a lot of it is playing out in discussions about Central Asia and initiatives and investment, commitments. I think it's interesting to go back to how the EU and China could cooperate in this regard, because pre-pandemic, this was actually a point where the EU and China had, quite firm ambitions to actually cooperate in this, and that included the EU-China connectivity platform, looking at how they could actually engage in joint financing, first in their own territories, but also in third countries, eventually. And that was really about them looking into things like infrastructure and transport corridors, things like that, in which the two of them working together could kind of come up with a common solution on standards, raising them, greening these kinds of things, and working together in terms of financing gaps. When you look at the connectivity discussion right now, what I think it's quite funny is they're trying to just avoid each other. Certainly there's a stronger element, probably naturally, of the geoeconomics in terms of the branding of global gateway versus partnership for global infrastructure versus BRI. But what's quite funny is the reality of those connectivity initiatives is the endpoint on both ends. It's China and it's Europe, and Central Asia is in the center. And there, I think, for all the areas where they're not coordinating, they don't seem to be having a conversation about how to be at the table together, or really, I think, considering in a meaningful way how to actually engage in joint financing, or having kind of common standards. At the same time, they're talking about the same things. They're talking about investing in basically the same things. And when you look at rhetoric from both sides, it's absolute commitment to sort of a middle corridor. And so I think it's kind of a strange way to see that all the groundwork and all the ground is quite fertile for cooperation between the EU and China. And then I think beyond the transport sector and infrastructure per se, hard infrastructure, there's a lot of domains where I think where China is moving into and where they're interested is exactly what the EU wants to offer as well. And those are things like green development, green energy, renewables, also issues of resource management, if it's water, agriculture and things like that. So it's quite funny to see that their interests are so common when you list them out one by one, and then see that they aren't really having that conversation together. Which is a very funny dynamic. It's connectivity, but in a very disconnected, kind of fragmented, way, if you will. But I mean, there's considerable interest from the Chinese side, of course, to engage with the Europeans. I think the resistance is largely geopolitical, and for various reasons. I think the initial inclination of 2019 for EU to be cooperating with China, a lot of that has faded because of the recent events and the war in Ukraine and other tensions globally. So
yeah, Nargis.
Yeah, just a little bit. I fully agree. I think the kind of there are different push and pull factors affecting the EU, and indeed, if you look at it, they share the interest, right, of this East-West corridor and kind of trade and connecting Central Asia to Europe, to China and Asia more. But at the same time, there is this geopolitical factor, right? That European Union is trying to kind of de-risk to decouple, partially decouple, de-risk, and all that. So they have kind of, I think they're trying to understand how to work with China, because both sides need each other, right? We all need each other, but it's difficult. So they're trying to develop an approach to to connectivity, right, with Central Asia, and how to work with China in this regard, because China should be on board. Definitely, China should be on board, and it cannot be done without China. But at the same time, kind of there are different interests. Like they want more connectivity. Why do they want more connectivity with Central Asia now, right? It's part of this de-risking process, right? Like to get and de-risking both from Russia and from China, right? And potentially, they want more gas, and they want more critical materials from Central Asia, like uranium, and so it's a pretty complex game. But I think they are kind of they are pushed closer together, and they need to talk more. And there was a platform already before the pandemic. They set up a platform. There was a EU China platform on kind of, I think they tried to understand what is the feasibility of the corridor, but not much happened there. So I think there is a need for more conversation and coordination, but at the same time, it's not easy. They're kind of dancing around the issue. But I think it's very important what happened last week. The big commitment of the EU to the corridor. That's a move in the right direction. And I think here, maybe if I can add to move like two sentences, I think here also you see kind of diversion of interest between China and Russia. Russia now is interested in the north-south corridor, Yeah, so it's Russia, Iran, India, and well, a bit to the Gulf and Central Asian states also connected. And China is interested in the East-West corridor. So again, the interests don't fully overlap between Russia and China as far as connectivity goes. And we are competing with Russia, right? Like Central Asian states are sort of competing with Russia for markets, for connectivity projects.
Yes, I would. Also agree on what Jai and you, Nergis, also said, that there are platforms, and there used to be the platform between European Union and China, and there are obviously a lot of common interests, but there are certain geopolitical limits that do not kind of allow these partnership or cooperation on Central Asia to happen. But what is the the Central Asian perspective on that, Nargis? Do you think that they want to see this partnership? Do you think that potentially in the future they would love to see some the West and China cooperate and kind of create mutual funds, etc., or the way it is right now is more beneficial for Central Asian countries when you have separate partners. Each of the partners is interested in specific projects and specific directions, and you can kind of play them off each other and kind of try to balance and not to kind of create a merged partner from these two separate partners right now.
That's a very good question, Simon, because I think now the competition is kind of helping, kind of to crowd in, right? To have more interest and more kind of partnerships and investments and assistance. But I think if we kind of think about the future, it will be good to have a partnership. I don't know how long this kind of competitive dynamic will last, right? If there is a partnership, then it's much more sustainable. So if kind of this competition will help, kind of will push the region a little bit up, yeah, the international agenda, but without being too much at the same. So it's quite. I would say it's quite delicate, right? Because you want some competition, but you don't want excessive competition. You don't want to be kind of torn in between the big powers. But Central Asian states will try to benefit from kind of whatever the situation is, and rightly so. We all need to kind of control the damage and try to benefit from opportunities, whatever they are. But hopefully, the kind of these push and pull factors, will not be destructive for the for the region, and will be able to adapt and kind of use the opportunities in a good way.
Jai, if I may turn to you, there are a lot of kind of stereotypes about China's presence in different parts of the world, and especially when we speak about Central Asia, there are a lot of alarmism that China is moving large, and as a huge wave will kind of push everyone else, and will somehow replace all of the partners the Central Asian countries have, and on the domestic market also Chinese businesses will be somebody with whom it's impossible to compete and stuff like that. I think there are also a lot of stereotypes about China's presence in Afghanistan as well, right? If you would open media, you will see a lot of articles about China investing a lot of money in infrastructure and becoming this major partner that Afghanistan wants to have, and that especially in the 2021, we remember that there were a lot of talks that China will now replace the US and stuff like that. Do you think that a couple of questions where this stereotypes are coming from, and the second one, what is the reality for China's presence in Afghanistan?
I think the first part is a little bit harder for me to answer. I think because I haven't done these, anthropological studies on how precisely these perceptions circulate. Certainly, there's a little bit of reality in it, but I think it's some of this is quite also embedded from, from decades ago, sort of unupdated views of what China represents, in terms of masses of people, but not necessarily high quality, injections of capital or projects that are, displacing local markets but not improving them. So I mean, that's a difficult quandary. I think perceptions are slowly changing about what Chinese investment entails, whether or not it is beneficial, and also I think much more sort of, instead of stereotypes, more grounded research is I think now coming out about there are negative aspects of it certainly, but sort of just at least more holistic conceptualizations of what China is and what Chinese companies do and what Chinese migrants offer, things like that. As it relates to Afghanistan, yes, I think this idea that China would replace the US, maybe that conversation is a little bit different. Certainly there's no huge influx of Chinese migrants, seeking to get into the foot in the door and into the Afghan market. I think it's a very small market for the Chinese. Certainly with the large-scale investments, these have been constantly in the news, but they have never really played out in ways that are at any level of scale compatible with the headlines, and I think that continues today. I think it really remains to be seen, sort of post reporting. How many, how much actual investment is there. There is some small scale investment, trade, things like that taking place in Afghanistan, but in terms of the larger ventures, some of the pronouncements and the announced figures are not there. And then when you look at the footprint in terms of replacing the US in any other domain, if you look even at the talks that Chinese are saying and the very active announcements they're having about China's development aid, it's so pitiful compared to what the US had been and also continues to provide to Afghanistan. It's like on a magnitude of order of magnitude less, in tens, hundreds of millions versus, upwards of $1 billion by the US in terms of humanitarian aid. So I would say there's not a huge risk of China really coming in. I think China is still considering how much it's going to invest in Afghanistan, given the security situation, which isn't perfect still. And I think one of the more recent, I don't know why I find this a little bit humorous, but the Afghans, they did end up building a road into China in the Wakhan corridor in Badakhshan. It's, I think, 50 kilometers of a road, trying to open it up. And I mean, in theory, this is exactly what the BRI, all the discussions of Afghanistan entering into the BRI, being part of CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, subsuming Afghanistan into it. It is about opening up these corridors of trade and transportation and infrastructure. But right now, the Chinese response, even in its media, is firmly, we have no interest right now in opening our side of the border. So it's quite, the reporting is a little bit, I find it kind of funny because on the Chinese, it's more like, oh, that's cute. You built a road. But right now, we don't find it viable enough for us to actually come in in any significant way to open up real large-scale investments. Definitely things are still on the table and discussions, but I think what's also important to note that the economic interest in Afghanistan, in its resources, in it as a transit corridor, they're not only from China, even though the immediate attention tends to be so. I think you have substantial interest still from also Uzbekistan, from Kazakhstan, from other countries that are engaged quite actively and seeing how to redevelop, renegotiate, and sort of start to implement some of the discussions about either energy, infrastructure, railway, all these discussions about opening up that corridor to the south. Down to ports for Central Asia. I think those are absolutely on the table still as well. And when you look at the range of discussions and negotiations and economic sort of overtures that the Taliban are making, it's not only to China, although China is one part of it. What I find very funny, let's say not funny, but what is interesting is the Taliban have started to adopt this language of multipolar, this is a multipolar world order, but this is also to say that they are not looking to rely exclusively on China, although China is, the biggest fish in the neighborhood presently.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a great example of how really sometimes some of the facts are just being circulated that are not objective or doesn't portray the picture as a whole. Nargis, you had a terrific piece at Carnegie last year under our project China Local Global, where you paid attention to the very detailed facts of how China is, I don't want to use the word buying elites in Central Asian countries, but it's reminds me of this kind of process. You were analyzing the humanitarian aid and how China uses it in Central Asia. Would you give a very quick kind of introduction into it and say what is the specific things that China is doing in Central Asia in this regard?
Thank you, Timur, for plugging this report in. Well, I wouldn't say buying. I would say cultivating relations with the elites and the public also in Central Asia through various means, and I think foreign aid, which would include humanitarian, but I think it's broader. Helps to do that. And GI mentioned trainings, like security trainings for security people. Yeah? There are kind of these regular trainings when Central Asian offices go to China and do some, I don't know how many weeks training, and that helps to build the networks. China is not the only one doing this, of course, right? Yeah. Turkey is doing this, US is doing this. So kind of course, personal relations, kind of building trust, that's kind of not a unique Chinese approach, but China is doing it on a scale that I think that others kind of find hard to do, and it really stresses this development of personal relations, as experts who study this stuff pointed out, like Lina Ben Abdullah, for example, studying China's aid to assistance to African countries. So yes, the report is a bit that, and I use the concept of gift giving, and I think that the kind of this benevolence, this kind of building good relationship by doing something good for the neighbor, for Central Asian states, and cultivating these good relations, good attitude is, I think, is quite important. Yeah, that's the core of China's approach, and I'm a little bit comparing it to the old times. To the tributary system, you can kind of dispute about the tributary system, how real it was or not. But there was this relationship between the imperial court in China and kind of the neighboring states, and the ritual, the gift exchange was a big part of it. So kind of I'm trying to argue that there are some patterns there, and especially with the kind of this gift giving helping to create the new hierarchical order. And I think that's what China is doing now. China does see itself as a kind of as a global power, and it is a global power. Yeah, and it needs to kind of foster this order where it is quite central. So I think for foreign aid is this way of developing these ties, and I think Russian approach and Chinese approach are quite different in this regard. How they build this order. Yeah, how kind of Russia interacts with Central Asian states and how China interacts with Central Asian states. Pretty different. But Timur, you're an expert yourself, and I can let me reciprocate by plugging your excellent paper for the OSCE Academy in Bishkek, your paper on Uzbekistan-China relations, how they evolved over time.
Thank you very much. I think our listeners should go to the Carnegie website and read this terrific paper. We are receiving a lot of questions on YouTube, and I will start asking them if you don't mind. The first one. China supports and collaborates with the Taliban, who hold rigid views on Islam. How do Central Asian regimes view this collaboration, given that they took strict action against their own Islamist movements? Who wants to answer that first question? I think Jai, yeah?
Yeah. I would say I don't. I wouldn't say that China's kind of engagement with the Taliban indicates acceptance of political Islam or Taliban ideological viewpoints. I think where the Taliban and China have been able to engage is to the extent that China sees and acknowledges and accepts the Taliban's argument that they're a nationalist movement. Very much in distinction, for example, to other terrorist groups still operating within Afghan's borders, including Islamic State, Khorasan, and other different kinds of terrorist groups that do have regional and even global ambitions. But certainly, I don't think China is a friend of Islam per se. What it is a friend of is sort of national sovereignty, stability, top-down governance, all these kinds of things that they see a partner in the Taliban with. And I think in that sense, it's very much the case in Central Asia as well, that a lot of Central Asian states see in the Taliban a partner that more or less has the same interests in kind of clamping down in a security sense, removing competitors, including terrorist groups that Central Asian states are concerned about. Not to all, the same degrees, and certainly not anymore as much with Pakistan. But I wouldn't say that this is an indication that China is sympathetic to Islamic views or to Taliban views. I think very much all of the governance systems in Central Asia and China and Afghanistan, their concerns are about national sovereignty, and that remains kind of a common interest on which they can basically coordinate and cooperate to the extent that it is really not aimed at furthering movements and groups that are either bottom up or cross-regional, across the border.
Can I add to that, Timur? Yes, fully agree with that. And just to elaborate a little bit, many years ago, when Obama announced the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan by 2014, and we were all like, discussing what's going to happen and, what should we do? And I wrote a paper for GI's actually institution for CIPRI on Central Asian perspectives on the situation in Afghanistan. So what the kind of Central Asians are thinking about the withdrawal and what should be done and all that. And I interviewed some officials, and I remember one Kazakh official directly involved in developing Kazakhstan's approach to the situation. He said, "Well, we need to negotiate with Taliban. It is a formidable force. Without Taliban, there will be no stability in Afghanistan. So they kind of, you need to work with the moderates and all that. But anyways, the Taliban needs to be on board. It's very, very pragmatic approach. So we don't like, of course, the ideology and all that. But if you want to have stabilization of Afghanistan, kind of, you cannot just take Taliban out of the equation. So that's the approach that was already kind of forming up, and that's why with the withdrawal, yes, there was a shock, but maybe not as strong as it would have been if we hadn't started kind of preparing for the withdrawal back then, right? Thinking kind of how to organize it when the Americans are out, when NATO troops are out. So kind of, yes, the withdrawal, this kind of the way the withdrawal took place was a shock, right? And the quick Taliban takeover was kind of okay, but I think there was already some thinking that took, well, definitely without, I think, but there was some thinking that took place prior, and this approach, except for Tajikistan. Tajikistan is in a different category. Although now it's changing, I think, slowly.
Yeah, I also agree with you. There is a specific question for Jai. Dr. Joe, could you please share your perspective on the Quadrilateral Cooperation and Coordination Mechanism? This is the mechanism between Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and its potential short-term and long-term implications on security in the region.
As far as I understand, it's still defunct because, there is acceptance of the ambassador in Beijing, Taliban ambassador in Beijing, and his credentials, but so far no formal recognition of the Taliban government. And that quadrilateral mechanism is between Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, and Tajikistan, and in terms of formal cooperation, I don't think that it's operating at this moment. I do think, at the time that it was announced, it was very interesting, to see China engage in such an initiative and setting it up, and really getting its hands a little bit more creatively interfering, or a little bit like dirty per se, in terms of regional security matters. But I think the understanding was that a lot of that concern was around threats of instability, possibly around Afghanistan, but also, of course, related to China's concern about Uyghur movements and things like that. I think a lot of that has transitioned into bilateral security cooperation. That can include also Chinese cooperation, security cooperation with the Taliban. Certainly, it's beefed up with Tajikistan. And I think one of the bigger questions for me in terms of this regional puzzle between these four countries, but in this wider area of Central South Asia and China, West Asia, let's say, is the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Because at this point, China is almost like assuming a mediator role. It's got positive, constructive relations with the Taliban. The Pakistani authorities increasingly do not. So in terms of how they're going to manage that cooperation and that coordination in ways that really serve mutual interests, if those interests are indeed common at all, is a question. So for now, I don't think that particular mechanism is operating. So I don't think there needs to be much more to be said there until something changes significantly. If it's revived again, I think then it'll be a different story. But at this point, I don't see it being revived significantly, also because Afghanistan and Pakistan are having so many bilateral tensions and issues.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so I will be combining some of the questions that we have. One is coming from a friend, Franz Olmos. If you're watching, hello. Thank you for watching. So the question is on the 10 years anniversary of Belt and Road and how it's changing the region, how Central Asian states are viewing Belt and Road cooperation with China. Are there changes in the policy implementation? And I will combine it, if I may, with the question on xenophobia in Central Asia among local populations, and if this xenophobia will be increasing or decreasing. I think Nargis.
Well, the BRI 10 question, that's well, in a nutshell, things are going well, especially if we look at Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. A lot of cooperation is going on, and well, Tajikistan is also quite it's flourishing. Kyrgyzstan, I think, the kind of less is happening for primarily for the reasons of kind of the situation in Kyrgyzstan and policy making and all that. And with Turkmenistan, it's limited, but also it's going well, right? So if you look at the deliverables of the BRI forum, the third BRI forum last year in October, kind of the list of deliverables, a lot of deliverables for Central Asia. Like, a lot is happening. It is really becoming comprehensive. The scope of projects is growing, and digital Belt and Road, well, digital Silk Road is growing, right? And also the kind of green development, clean energy. That's also a big theme in China Central Asia cooperation. So it's really going, and that's because there is the mutual interest. Well, as GI was kind of telling us about Afghanistan, trying to reach out and build the road and kind of connect to it. Now we are trying to get more access to Chinese markets for agricultural goods, for some other goods, because it's a supermarket, right? That's where we want to get to make money. And with what's happening, what we started with the geopolitical change, also kind of it's this east-west corridor that we need, right? Connect more to Europe, and to not only to Europe, actually, to the countries of the South Caucasus, to Turkey, to West Asia, and to Europe. So, I know we don't have time, so I'll stop there. Oh, xenophobia. I don't know if it will grow or not. I think it's kind of, my sense is that it's decreasing, if anything, and maybe it's linked to the kind of good behavior of China and bad behavior of Russia. And kind of China next to Russia looks better and better, So it's kind of, I think we refocused, and we see the growing disapproval rates of Russia and Russian policies in the region, particularly in Kazakhstan, like really great by 30% or something like that, some big leap.
Yeah. On xenophobia, I will encourage everyone to visit the Central Asia Barometer's website. They have a lot of reports that are being held for the last 5 or 6 years. So I think you can track the differences in the surveys. And on that note, I want to thank once again Nargis Kasanova, Zhou Jiayi. Thank you so much for great insights. And I also encourage everyone to follow our speakers on X, in good old days known as Twitter, and to follow their work, because what they're doing is very important. Thank you once again from me. You can find all of the materials of the event on Carnegie China website. Please follow us, subscribe, follow us on the newsletters. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Timo. Thank you very much, Tia.